I have a message for the people of Lebanon. Israel's war is not with you. It's with Hezbollah.
On Monday, 23rd of September, Lebanon woke up to the sound of bombs. It was the deadliest day in Lebanon in nearly 2 decades. Thousands of Israeli bombs rained down across southern and eastern Lebanon, hitting areas where Hezbollah, the Iran-backed militant group, holds sway. On that Monday alone, Israel hit 1,600 Hezbollah sites. They said they had no choice, that Hezbollah was hiding deadly missiles among civilians.
The IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way.
But those same civilians paid the price. Whole neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, and people had little time to escape. Over 700 lives were lost till now. Women, children, and medics among them. More than 5,000 people were left wounded. Entire families were torn apart. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Hezbollah is using civilians as human shields.
For too long, Hezbollah has been using you as human shields. It placed rockets in your living rooms and missiles in your garage.
An accusation he's used against Hamas in Gaza as well. These attacks have displaced more than 90,000 Lebanese people. If Israel's goal is self-defense, why are so many innocent civilians paying the price? By Tuesday, the strikes hadn't stopped. Another 100 projectiles were fired at Israel, and in return, more bombs were dropped on southern Lebanon. It wasn't just a military conflict anymore. It was becoming a humanitarian crisis. Even as the Israeli military hit what it called weapons storage facilities, Lebanese civilians continued to die. One of the deadliest hits came in the Gobeiri neighborhood. First responders rushed to the scene, sirens echoing through the chaos. Hezbollah, meanwhile, mourned the loss of senior commander Ibrahim Kubaisi, killed in a strike on their Beirut stronghold. Israel argues that it is targeting Hezbollah's military infrastructure. But is it really necessary to bomb densely populated neighborhoods in Beirut and beyond? The Dahieh district, a Hezbollah stronghold in Beirut, was heavily bombed. But with it, homes, schools, and hospitals were also reduced to rubble. But what exactly is Hezbollah? And why has Israel deemed it such a threat that they are willing to bomb areas with civilians? To understand Israel's actions, we need to look at Hezbollah's origins. Hezbollah, a Shia Islamist group, was founded in the 1980s during the Lebanese Civil War, primarily as a response to Israel's invasion of southern Lebanon in 1982. Its early formation was backed by Iran, which provided training and financial support via the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Over time, Hezbollah has evolved into a highly influential political and military organization in Lebanon, capable of exerting significant power both within its borders and across the region. Hezbollah operates not just as an armed militia, but also as a political party, with seats in Lebanon's parliament. It provides extensive social services, including running schools, hospitals, and welfare programs, particularly in regions where the Lebanese government has limited reach. This dual structure of military and civilian operations helps Hezbollah maintain popular support, especially among Lebanon's Shia population. However, Israel views Hezbollah as a significant threat. The group's military wing is heavily armed, with a reported arsenal of over 100,000 rockets and missiles, many of which are aimed at Israeli cities. Hezbollah is also seen as a proxy for Iran's influence in the region, further exacerbating tensions between Israel and Iran. This connection is critical, as Hezbollah openly opposes Israel's existence and has been involved in numerous conflicts with the Israeli military, including the 2006 Lebanon War. Historically, the region's complex relationship dates back to the early 20th century. The territories of modern-day Lebanon, Israel, and Syria were once part of the Ottoman Empire, and after World War I, they were carved up by colonial powers. But the historical roots of the Israel-Lebanon-Syria conflict are deeply intertwined with the larger Arab-Israeli struggle. Since Israel's creation in 1948, the country has been engaged in wars with its Arab neighbors, including Syria, Lebanon, though initially neutral, became a key player after the 1975 Lebanese Civil War, which shattered the country's fragile political and religious balance. Lebanon's southern region became a base for Palestinian militants, including the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, who launched attacks on Israel. In 1982, Israel launched Operation Peace for Galilee, invading Lebanon in response to attacks by the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, and other groups based in Lebanon. While the initial target was the PLO, the occupation eventually led to a bloody conflict with Hezbollah. Israeli troops stayed in southern Lebanon until 2000, when they withdrew after nearly 2 decades, mainly due to Hezbollah's persistent attacks. This withdrawal was seen as a major victory for Hezbollah, enhancing its reputation as a resistance force against Israeli occupation. But why was Israel involved in Lebanon in the first place? Was it truly about security, or were there other motives at play? While Israel argues it was protecting its northern borders, the brutality of its operations raises questions about the human cost of its actions. For instance, in 1996, Israel conducted Operation Grapes of Wrath, which led to the deaths of over 100 civilians at a UN shelter in Qana. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, with thousands displaced. Did Israel ever care about the Lebanese lives it destroyed in its quest for security? The broader conflict with Syria is also crucial. Syria, under the Assad regime, has long used Lebanon as a proxy battleground to oppose Israel. Syria occupied Lebanon for much of the latter part of the 20th century and provided support to Hezbollah as a way to counter Israel. While Syria officially exited Lebanon in 2005, its influence remains strong, largely through Hezbollah, which continues to play a role in both Lebanese politics and military confrontations with Israel. And now, again, in 2024, Israel's attacks on Lebanon and Syria have escalated dramatically. The violence took a chilling turn on September 17th, when thousands of pagers belonging to Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon exploded. At least 11 people, including 3 civilians, were killed, and around 2,750 were wounded in the blast. For nearly a year, Hezbollah and Israel have been exchanging fire along the southern Lebanese border. The conflict began on October 8th, when Hezbollah launched attacks aimed at deterring Israel's war on Gaza, a war that has already claimed over 41,000 lives. Israel says its actions are in response to Hezbollah's missile strikes, which were fired in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. But in just the past week, more than 700 people have been killed in Lebanon, many of them civilians, as Israeli airstrikes continue to hit Hezbollah targets. Meanwhile, in Syria, Israeli attacks are ongoing, targeting military positions connected to Iranian forces and Hezbollah. But what are the real reasons behind these attacks? Is it purely about security? Or is it something more sinister? Israel justifies its actions by labeling Hezbollah as a terrorist organization backed by Iran. They claim these operations are necessary to stop arms supplies and defend their borders. However, critics argue that Israel's aggression is excessive and indiscriminately harms civilians. Some question the true motives behind the constant airstrikes. Could it be Israel's desire to maintain dominance over Lebanon and Syria, especially given the strategic Golan Heights? Or is this conflict driven by deeper political and ideological reasons, not just defense? While Israel frames Hezbollah as an existential threat, its actions raise more questions than answers. Are these attacks truly about preventing future violence, or are they an excuse to weaken its neighbors further, making sure they remain too fragmented to resist Israel's regional ambitions? After all, both Lebanon and Syria are in fragile states due to years of conflict. These strikes may deepen instability and fuel more hatred. Lebanese civilians have been hit the hardest. Entire families have been wiped out, with buildings flattened in places like Shaba and Nabatie. Hospitals near the border have shut down due to heavy bombardment. If Israel is so focused on security, why are they causing so much harm to innocent people? Are they making their own case for future retaliation? Syria, still recovering from a brutal civil war, is another target. 5 Syrian soldiers were killed recently in airstrikes, reflecting Israel's ongoing strategy to keep Iran's influence at bay. But is attacking Syria really making Israel safer, or is it simply creating more enemies? But did you know that Israel's military operations in Lebanon and Syria are not only about security, but also have significant economic and strategic motives? The Golan Heights, seized from Syria in 1967, is not just a military vantage point, but also a valuable source of water for Israel. This fertile region supports agricultural activity and helps secure Israel's control over a critical resource. By maintaining dominance here, Israel ensures not only its physical security, but also economic stability. The economic worth of this land cannot be understated. It provides roughly 15% of Israel's water supply. But at what cost? Furthermore, Israel's defense industry is a significant part of its economy, with continuous conflict ensuring the demand for its advanced weapons and technology. Israel exports military technology to numerous countries, and its reputation as a powerful military force is partly sustained by these ongoing conflicts. The constant need for security allows Israel to justify military investments, creating a cycle where its economic benefits are tied to prolonged instability. This raises the question, is Israel's involvement in these conflicts fueled, in part, by the economic gains from its defense sector? In addition to the military advantages, Israel's strikes are meant to weaken Hezbollah. Hezbollah operates from southern Lebanon and has gained considerable military power since the 2006 war with Israel. By attacking supply routes through Syria and Lebanon, Israel aims to curtail Hezbollah's access to advanced weaponry, which could be used against Israel. But these actions lead to more suffering for civilians, displacing thousands and causing widespread destruction. Israel's stance on security has often been used to justify its strikes. Israeli officials argue that Hezbollah's presence along the northern border presents a direct threat. But can such intense military responses be considered defensive when they result in the deaths of innocent civilians and create further instability? Critics argue that Israel's actions are not just about security, but about maintaining its military dominance and regional superiority, no matter the human cost. Israel's close relationship with the U.S. also plays into its strategic motivations. The U.S. provides Israel with billions in military aid annually, and Israel's military actions help maintain this support by framing itself as a necessary bulwark against Iranian influence in the region. The strikes on Hezbollah, seen as an Iranian proxy, bolster Israel's position as a key U.S. ally. However, this dynamic leads to broader tensions in the Middle East, with other regional powers, such as Iran, becoming more entrenched in their opposition to Israel's presence and policies. But why is Iran so deeply involved in the conflict between Israel and its neighbors? One answer could be its long-standing opposition to Israel's existence. But there's more to it. Is it really just ideology? Or does Iran have something more strategic in mind? Iran has positioned itself as a major backer of groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. They provide weapons, money, and training to these groups, enabling them to fight Israel. But why? Iran sees these groups as extensions of its own power. By supporting them, it increases its influence across the region without having to engage in direct conflict itself. This is a classic case of proxy warfare. Iran stays at a distance, while its allies, Hezbollah and Hamas, engage directly with Israel. But is this all just about supporting Palestine? Or does Iran have other motives? Economically, Iran gains by keeping Israel distracted and embroiled in constant conflict. This destabilization reduces the chance of Israel being able to build stronger relations with nearby Arab nations, which could hurt Iran's own influence in the region. It's not just about ideology, it's strategic. Iran wants to remain a key player in Middle Eastern politics. There's also the fear of a direct Israeli attack on Iran, especially given Israel's concerns over Iran's nuclear program. Iran uses Hezbollah as a deterrent. If Israel strikes Iran directly, Hezbollah is ready to retaliate from Lebanon. This balance of terror keeps things tense, but prevents full-blown war, at least for now. Iran's involvement can also be seen as an attempt to rally the Shiite populations of Lebanon and Iraq, using the Israeli conflict to solidify its leadership in the Muslim world. The assassination of key Hezbollah and Hamas leaders by Israel only strengthens Iran's resolve, pushing it to retaliate or increase support for these groups. But will Iran ever step into direct conflict? Experts suggest that Iran prefers to avoid direct engagement, focusing instead on supporting these proxy groups while protecting its own national interests. Okay, but why does the world keep turning a blind eye when Israel bombs Lebanon and Syria? It's not like civilians aren't dying, right? Over 90,000 people have been displaced in Lebanon alone by Israeli airstrikes as of September 2024, and yet international powers like the US seem more focused on preserving Israel's right to defend itself rather than protecting innocent lives caught in the crossfire. How can this be justified when hundreds are killed and thousands injured? Human Rights Watch has condemned the bombings, citing violations of international law. But where's the real action? The United Nations, while calling for ceasefires, continues to face resistance, especially from Israel, which claims these strikes are aimed at Hezbollah militants, not civilians. But can we trust this narrative when even Lebanese officials accuse Israel of deliberately targeting civilian areas? Are the deaths of women and children, which have surged into the hundreds, simply collateral damage for Israel? And what about the US role in all this? American officials are urging for de-escalation, but they're still heavily backing Israel militarily. The Biden administration talks about peace, but is peace even possible when Israel continues to attack under the guise of self-defense? U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned of disastrous consequences if the conflict escalates into a full-scale war. Yet, despite these warnings, Israel continues its bombardments. Why isn't the U.S. pushing harder for an end to these strikes if they know how bad things could get? What's even more shocking is the silence from other global powers. The UN has tried calling for ceasefires, but these efforts seem toothless, particularly when facing Israel's military power and political clout. Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrian people are left to suffer, caught in the middle of a war they didn't ask for. Moreover, Israeli political ideology, particularly under far-right governments, leans heavily on the narrative of being a Jewish state surrounded by enemies. This belief fuels much of the justification for its military actions. Many within Israel believe that any compromise on security or territory would threaten their national identity. But does this give Israel a free pass to wage war on its neighbors whenever it chooses? What about Palestine? The ideological battle between Zionism and Palestinian nationalism is at the heart of this conflict. Zionism, which advocates for a Jewish state in historic Palestine, inherently conflicts with Palestinian aspirations for statehood. Israel's political establishment, especially its more conservative factions, have used this ideological divide to justify policies like settlements in the West Bank and the ongoing blockade of Gaza. Israel's continuous expansion into Palestinian territories under the guise of security is not just a political maneuver, it's an ideological statement. It reinforces the idea that the land belongs exclusively to Israel. which leaves no room for Palestinian self-determination. Can ideology ever justify the sheer destruction, the loss of innocent lives, and the decades of suffering faced by Palestinians? The global community, including many in the UN, has questioned Israel's policies, labeling them as disproportionate and, in many cases, violations of international law. Yet, Israel's ideological stance, deeply embedded in its political system, continues to fuel this cycle of violence. Isn't it time we start questioning the moral justification behind this conflict? When we step back and consider all of this, it becomes clear that Israel's military actions are driven by more than just defense. Political and ideological dominance plays a significant role in its ongoing assaults on Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. But where does this end?